Starting the drawing. Now, drawing really starts right here with what I'm doing, taking and sharpening a pencil. And I want to take and leave nothing to the imagination. I want to take and get you right from the beginning. Okay, now, how do you hold the pencil? How do you sharpen it? Okay, start with what I'm doing with the sand pad. This is a sand pad, okay, charcoal pencil. The point that we try to do here is to take and sharpen the pencil so that we have as long a sharp point as we possibly can on the pencil. Now, the reason for this is that what we want to do is be able to hold the pencil with all four fingers and our thumb, not the way you would normally do as if you were taking and writing. Now, the reason for this is that when you're holding the pencil, at this point you tend to be preoccupied with the point of the pencil. And it also limits the amount of movements that you can take and make. Now, in the beginning, this is going to feel like you're taking and drawing with your left foot if you're not used to taking and working this way. The point is that I can go from here, I can go make a line, I can go into a tone, I can pull a line, I can do all kinds of things. So this is where you begin the drawing, starting to take and develop your skills, just the pure technical things. Okay, the next thing nobody ever really seems to think too much about is how do you sit at a drawing board? Now I'm going to take and go over here and show you. Okay, first of all, this contraption is called a horse. Yeah, that's why I wear these cowboy boots, you know. Okay, but this is, you know, the pain to every art student. I've got permanent grooves in my gluteus medius and minimus and maximus that take and prove that, you know, the 25, 30 years I've been using one of these things. But when we sit at a drawing bench, what you don't do is you don't take and you don't hunch over. What you want to try to do, so when you're working from a model, is you try to take and sit so that the paper is always at a right angle to your eyes, so that you can see very clearly. You don't get any distortion. You start doing this, and you're going to start getting all kinds of distortions, what have you. Okay. The next thing is, when later you'll see when I have the model up here, you always try to take and look directly at the model. You try to eliminate as many problems as you possibly can. Okay, let's get back up here now. Okay, starting a drawing it's a mental process. It's something that we do with our brain. First of all, the drawing is a very, very logical, rational type of thing. First, you have to have a plan of attack, a method. Just like anything, you have to know how you're going to take and approach what it is you're doing. Now, this approach that you take to the drawing is really determined by how you take and do the drawing, or what the drawing is supposed to do, what purpose you're taking and making this drawing for. For instance, if we were taking and doing a mural, we would be taking, and the first consideration would be thinking about a very, very large format of the thing. You wouldn't start a mural by taking and doing a rendering of a head over in the left-hand corner. The first thing that you would be after would be the very, very large scope of the drawing. We'd be looking for the total. We'd be looking at what the overall design of the mural would be. And the drawing would be no more complicated than this is. And basically we refer to as a thumbnail. This is where the drawing takes and begins. Okay, number one. Now, of course, it would be, if I had a model sitting up here for 2 hours and was taking a drawing, that would be a whole different ball game. I would be taking in, had more time, more consideration. The fast pose is another different point of view. There's also ways of taking and approaching the drawing in terms of stylistic tendencies. There's what we refer to as direct drawing, where there's no lay-in, there's no preliminary work. Some of the drawings up here, for instance, are taken as direct drawings. So if we could take a look at this gal sitting here on a couch with his dress on. Now, this was a direct drawing. There was no preliminary drawing done to it. It's more like a fashion drawing. Okay. Some of these other things what we refer to as more a traditional, procedural approach to drawing. Let's say, like, for instance, the drawing up here in the corner. Now, this was done with a procedural approach with a definite lay-in to the drawing by had a very, very definite step-by-step method of approaching the drawing. Now, as we go along, we'll take, and today I'm not going to try to take and go through a complete drawing. I'm really going to take and concentrate on analyzing the pose, analyzing what the model is doing, and how we take and start the drawing. Okay. Now, first thing I said, you have to have a method, a procedure, a plan of attack. Okay. Secondly, the most important thing is you have to have the knowledge to take and pursue that thing. You know, what's the anatomy, all of the different, take some basic approaches to the thing. And thirdly, which is actually the most important thing, is you have to have that spirit that's going to take and carry that thing through. And that's the hard part. It's the thing that you'll find that artists that have no experience at all, the people that have no formal training, have lots of. You find that people that just sit down and do a child drawing, they have that spirit, that enthusiasm, the thing, carry it through. Now, this is the thing that sort of gets lost once you start learning how to draw, and that thing that you have to work on like crazy to take and maintain, and it's the thing that, you know, makes the art the art. Okay, now let's start with taking and working with the model. What do you take and look at? Now, this is part of the procedure, part of the knowledge thing. Okay, Jan, do you want to get up here? Okay, now I put some tape on Jan to take and illustrate just a couple of very, very simple points. Now, first of all, when you look at the model, and the thing is that the human figure is such a complex form, and what we have to do is we have to take and develop a sort of hierarchy of things that we take and look at, things that are first of importance, second, tertiary. We try to take and train our mind to take and look at only those things that are taken and relevant to us to see. So, first of all, try to think of the model as being, you know, we can take and think of it as a like basic simple line that takes and goes down. Let's get rid of some of this stuff here. We have, you're looking at Jan here, we try to see just a very, very, very simple action. All I'm doing, now this line, and then when we're starting doing the drawings, this line is not any kind of a anatomical line. It's just something that takes into the symbol for what the direction of the figure is doing. Legs coming down, going out. Now I'm probably seeing it at a little different angle than you are, but now what the tape does, and I'm taking and exaggerating a little bit here, is that it's emphasizing a point that the fact that the body is symmetrical. Now we've got, you know, left side, right side, but both sides work off this common line, and what we try to see is the fact it's like a railroad track. If you have a railroad track, that the ties on a railroad track are always at a perpendicular angle to the track itself. Okay? So the first thing we have to do is we look at this thing, we try to see what these basic simple actions are. Okay, the fact now that this, on one hand, we're talking about a two-dimensional aspect of the drawing. It's, you know, I'm working on a two-dimensional piece of paper. It's flat. So you have to take and communicate the action onto this flat two-dimensional piece of paper. And this is a way, it's like translating from one language into another language. So the first thing that I try to do is to say, okay, analyzing it, I try to see, okay, how can I exaggerate? First, you want to feel the pressure that this hip is taking going out. We want to feel the fact that the rib cage is thrusting out here. And seeing this basic simple line to first begin with takes and gives us that sort of a feeling for that action. Okay, we feel a thrust, we feel this push, we feel this. And now what I'm starting to do in drawing this, I'm taking and working in such a way that my actual activity, the physical aspect of doing the drawing, starts to get into play. So that it's an intellectual approach and it's also a mental approach. Okay, now let's go back. Same pose now. Start thinking a little more carefully, and analyzing what's going on. She's taking and she's doing this. Taking, coming across, coming through here. You try to look for where basically the center of balance of the figure is. And essentially, what we do is we take a line from the pit of the neck. We take a point from here, and we try to draw a simple straight line down visually. We think. A lot of that stuff is done in the head. Try to feel the line from here going down to her heels. And to see how far this is taking and swinging one way, how far this is going the other way. Okay, Jan, let's take a turn it profile thing. Now let's see if the camera is picking up a profile there. Okay, now we take one of the things that this is a hard part. There's a gap between the intellectual part of viewing something two-dimensionally and the physical feeling something. Now, what I always recommend students to do is to take and actually get into the pose sometimes, to take and feel what it is, because it's a felt type of activity. When I'm teaching at Disney, we're working for movement. We're working for the flow of the thing. And so we have to take and really understand how something takes and moves. So when I'm teaching there, I try to take and emphasize the fact that it's the pull of one thing, and you get in the pose yourself to take and feel the thrust of things. Now, what I'm also doing here in the drawing is that you notice that I'm continually trying to take and think of the total. I've always sort of joked that we ought to have total artists that have the total tattooed across their fingers, so we can take and really remember it, because it's the most important thing that you can deal with. Okay, feel the flow. One figure is pulling to the next. This is coming through. And we do not start with taking and getting preoccupied with contours. Now, like I said, these lines are not any real lines that are on the model. They're only lines that take and communicate what the model is doing. In a sense, what I'm doing is I'm analyzing the model. I'm not taking and copying the model. I want to take and communicate what that model is doing. Okay, so now as we start to do this, I want to take and be conscious of the fact, okay, that again, it's a physical. I think of the physical attributes of what's going on. I feel like the rib cage is in here. This is taking and thrusting out. I feel this is coming back. We feel the flow. And it may be working with a rhythm or curve that takes and carries and forces the thing to come out. Okay, or pulling through where this is going to take and go. Now, okay, let's take and do a reclining one. Okay. Now, okay, the camera is going to be taking, and you're going to be seeing more of a horizontal thing. I'm seeing a little more of a foreshortened thing here, but that doesn't matter. Okay, now in fact, what you try to do is what I try to do in teaching drawing is that you should be able to take and draw the pose or what the model is doing from any angle, regardless of what angle you take and see that model from. Because you look at the model for information. We're again, repeating, we're not copying the model, it's information. And so, I'm trying to feel how she's saying, how the hip is lifting up, how she is pulling across, and it's a felt type of activity. Feeling the pull, where the leg is coming forward, or feeling here. I'm just using here, basically trying to a placement thing. I'm taking and beginning to think of how this thing pulls out here, shoulder here. Now, I've been drawing with basically simple lines here. Now, part of the analyzing of the pose, and this is almost like saying starting a drawing, but I'm not really trying to start a drawing here. I'm just taking and trying to get you to see a little bit of the physical activity that's involved in putting this thing down. Now, in your mind, what you have to be doing is not only seeing this sort of physical, kinetic quality that's going on with the model, but you have to be able to start analyzing it as a three-dimensional mass. Okay, now with this pose, I'm seeing a little more dramatic view. I'm thinking, now, not that you necessarily draw this. This is what's going on in your head. You have to start to, and I do exercises quite often with students where we take and do this. We take and block things into squares and spheres and what have you, to just as a means of analyzing and making it clear what it is that you're seeing. So I can take and say the hip. I could start to see this is a simple volume. I would take and be concerned with which way is it taking and working in space. So I'm analyzing the direction. I start to feel it's coming through, thinking of the rib cage as a volume, and to be conscious of how the pelvic area is fitting into this volume, how the neck pulls and stretches into this, and how the head would be fitting on that. Very diagrammatical. Okay. Same thing with the legs coming out. It's analyzing direction of the form. Okay, let's go back to our simple sort of standing pose again. Okay, let's do the back view again. That takes in. Okay. Now, besides taking and looking at the simple, say gestures, what do you call it? The angle of the shoulders, the angle of the pelvis, where the leg is, to take and see where basically your center line is, the knee taking and going down. I would also become very, very conscious of the fact from the back that I don't really see it, because if we were taking looking at her from the side, we would see the fact that the back is curved in. Her gluteus maximus and minimus are sticking out, her shoulders are going back up, and we start to feel these things in space. We try to see the volume. So again, I would be analyzing this from a spatial element, trying to, again, thinking in very, very simple forms. Kinetics, we start to see this pushing. This is going in. I would try to see that this is a box type form that is pushing back in. The leg is a three-dimensional form that's going back in here. And I would try to be very careful about thinking about how far this leg is, how far it's going out. Now, one of the things I haven't mentioned here is, for instance, analyzing, say, proportion. Well, actually, if you're taking and drawing and getting your feeling correctly, your proportions will come out. Okay, feeling the elbow coming out here. Now again, I'll be thinking about where is in space. Which way does it take and pull? Do it diagrammatically, thinking this is a round sphere sticking out here. This is going back. Where across is this knee? How far does one buttocks drop from another? So you can see as I'm doing here, I'm already taking and, in a sense, doing a drawing, but I'm not doing a drawing. Really, what I'm doing is taking and just trying to analyze the drawing. I'm diagramming what is going on. Okay, now let's take and I'm going to sit down here and do a couple of very, very quick taking sketches of what is of a sort of approaches to the drawing to start with. Okay, let's just do the simple. Okay, now I'm saying there's more than one way to skin a cat. The first basic procedure, and it's the thing that we all sort of learn, is what we talk about is a stick figure. In other words, something like this type thing. And what I was taking and diagramming up on the board. Very simple form. Shoulders going across, primarily just concerned with placement. Okay. Another approach is to take and do the same thing, and because what I'm doing here is just concerned with the total. The other thing is taking and using a simple thing like the chamois. Taking and starting a drawing, getting the feeling for the action by just pushing. Now, what I'm careful not to do here is to be preoccupied with any kind of contour. What I'm doing, in a sense, I'm taking and analyzing the pose, trying to feel the mass. I'm not taking and coming in and filling it in. That's not the point at all. The point is to take and get something out there and push it through. Okay. A third way, and of course there's more than three ways. There's, every artist develops his own way. In fact, there aren't any rules. What works is right. Okay. A third way would be to take and, is sort of a la Daumier, would be to take and sort of almost a scribble type of drawing, where you just take and you try to feel what the thing was. No discriminatory thing other than you're trying to sense what that action is, trying to get a feeling for that total. Go down. And as you would progress with the drawing, we would be taking and getting a little tighter, picking up a little clearer lines, and slowly developing that form a little bit more. Now, I sort of refer to this as artillery practice. You're taking a sort of one over, one under, and you slowly keep zeroing in. Now, okay, Jan. Now, what I want to do is to take and point out some of these drawings. Now, it's hard to take and look at a finished drawing a lot for the untrained eye to see how it was started. Now, I've got a whole gamut of different kinds of drawings and different ways that they've been started. Now, if we can take and see this one way over in the corner here, I don't know if we can pick this one up. This was more of the last way here. Let's take and pick up. In other words, the dark one, and here is sort of a combination. I took, and let me get in here so I can point these things out a little more clearly. This drawing here was started first with a chamois and then came back in with a very, very, very kinetic type of line, just trying to feel. There was no preciseness about it. It was just, the effort was to try to take and get a feeling for the total. And it was a very fast pose. It was probably no more than 2 minutes. This was quite the opposite. These were 25-minute poses, and at that I only got fragments. I was taking and studying one part at a time. I developed it. Was very, very careful to take and first take and get the shape, get the placement. But I was also taking and doing some, because everything is a combination of things. There's no one thing or the other. I took and I was feeling for the action. It's a kinetic thing. Okay, here is a different kind of drawing. This I was just, again, like I was doing here, I was looking at just a fragment of the drawing, but I was taking and zeroing in. I was talking about drapery. We were doing that. So I was very, very careful about it. I took very carefully and blocked in the shapes, and then slowly took and started to take and develop the thing, because I wanted to show, in fact, how the light was falling on it. In fact, it changed. Now, this was totally different. This is more like I started in the first part of our discussion, talking about sort of a direct drawing. This drawing may look different, but it was done basically the same way as this sort of fashion type drawing was done here. So that it was a direct drawing. I took and I started out, there was no preliminary lay-in, or I can see that it looked like maybe I did a little bit of stick figure in here. Now, which is an important point, is that most students when they start out, have difficulty with putting lines down that they're afraid are going to take and show in the finished drawings. Like, for instance, in this drawing, and I don't think you can see them on the camera there, is that there was sort of a little bit of a stick figure. There's lines that go down through the center here that basically disappear when you take and start to develop the drawing farther and go beyond that point. Now, these drawings here were actually done without a model. These were taken and first part of the drawing was done with a wash, taking an ink wash the same way I was taking and working with a chamois. And by the way, if you don't know what a chamois is, which I didn't mention that, a chamois is the same thing that you wash your car with, just that piece of skin. And don't wash it, though. It never gets washed, and your hands get grungy and dirty. Okay, that's part of the game. Okay, but this was started the way. These, the same size, were done very, very carefully. They were done with a very, very clear lay-in to the drawing, so that they had, again, a different procedure. They are maybe not as flowing as this. Now, all of these small ones right here, now these were done, like these were, the ones next to them were done without a model. These were done with a model and working with a pen, so that they were very, very direct. There was no lay-in. Again, these are like the fashion drawing. The next drawing was the opposite. This is very labored. I think I spent, I shouldn't say labored, I spent a lot of labor on it, and it took a lot of time. This was like, probably an hour and a half drawing, but very careful. But again, those preliminary drawings, lines that I put in there, were disappeared. They don't show. The same as what goes on here. All of the preliminary work disappears the minute you start taking and putting this wash on. If we take and look at, for instance, the drawings of a Michelangelo, we took a Rubens, you find that they worked in procedures that well, one of the ways they would work with very, very soft charcoal. Then they would take and start going over that. In the end, they used to take and erase those preliminary drawings. So we take a look at these beautiful inked line drawings, and quite often we're not aware of the fact that these things were done in such a slow, laborious manner. Like, for instance, this drawing here, although it's never a finished drawing, it was just begun, but I was starting, and you can see it's working with just a plain ballpoint pen. It's just cross-hatching. The very, very careful preliminary drawing underneath. And the more I work on this thing, the more this is going to take and disappear. Okay. This drawing over here now, if you can see here, okay, this, it looks like a really, really fast drawing. And the whole effort of the thing was to take and try to communicate this sort of movement and flow that goes on. And I started out working not with chamois, but with a large block of pastel. And then I came and rubbed it down, and then I came back and worked into it some more. But it actually, where some of the other drawings, where this is, okay, a 2-minute drawing, 3-minute drawing, looks like this was probably more like a 25-minute drawing. So it took me a lot of time to take and do it. Now, let's take and go back to Jan here. Jan, you want to? Let's go back to starting the drawing. Or you should say really analyzing the pose. Okay, so how you take and put these first marks down are not really important. It's really the thinking process that takes and goes on. Now I'm going to take and work with the chamois to start with. And I'm going to combine several different methods to taking and analyzing the pose and to taking and beginning the drawing. First, I want to feel that action. Just pull, try to fill up the whole page, take in. Now remember, at this stage of the drawing, you are strictly analyzing. You're not taking and trying to do anything finished. Now, I'm going to take and combine 3 different approaches here to start with. Okay. First, I'm taking and thinking about starting to slow down a little bit. Take and feel where that head is, feel where the pit of the neck is, analyze the direction of that torso. Start to feel, just actually putting down a physical line where that angle of that pelvis is, where the angle of the shoulder is. Rib cage, I feel the movement, and I'm physically trying to feel what's going on. Okay. This is really the beginning of the drawing. The work, in fact, one of my standard statements about starting a drawing is that most mistakes are made in the first minute. And if you don't spend the time on the starting of the drawing, if you don't make it longer, even in a minute pose, you should use most of your time on that beginning. That you will spend the rest of the time of the drawing taking and trying to overcome that mistake that you made in that first minute. Okay, that's right. Now, I'm going to take and concentrate on this, on the starting of the drawing. Now, as I said earlier, that the most important part of a drawing is the beginning. You want to take as much time, in fact, you should spend most of your time learning how to start a drawing. An hour is not too long to take and start a drawing. You want to take and go through all the mental aspects of the drawing. The feeling for the pose, feeling the action, what's going on, thinking about the method that you're going to take and do the drawing in, and work it out in your mind before you ever take and try to take and put a mark down on that paper. Now let's take and sit down and start working on this drawing. Okay. Now, as I said before, the most important part of the drawing is to think about what it is that you're going to do. The reason that you're doing the drawing also takes and really has an awful lot to do with what you're doing. Now, I'm going to take and put as my purpose for doing this drawing, besides demonstrating you how to start a drawing, but as a means of taking and studying the figure, taking and learning as a learning process, what you would do in a class, in a life drawing class. So the first consideration is to try to faithfully communicate what's going on there. Analyze that figure, analyze the gesture, what's going on. So my first thing is to take, and I'm going to work with the chamois, my first approach here. And what I want to do now is to take and, now this may seem like a sort of a slapdash type of way of approaching, but actually as I'm doing this now, I'm trying to take very carefully to feel what that attitude of that head is. I'm taking and feeling the way the neck pulls out of that, where I feel the rib cage down. There's a slight twist in there, feeling, and I'm taking and feeling through the center of the form, coming through, feeling the legs coming down, pulling all the way down to the ankle. Now, I'm not committed to following every little mark that I take and put down here. This is really an analysis of what's going on. I'm trying to take and feel what's going on. The angle of the shoulders, feeling the volume of the rib cage, arm dropping down, shoulder pulling out. Okay, now, actually I should have even started a little bit farther back than I have here. So really my first consideration was to think about what area is that drawing going to take and occupy. In other words, we want to take and fill up this piece of paper. Now, the old cliche is that the first line you put down is really the fifth line, because you have 4 lines, in other words, the sides of the paper. Oh, here we're more concerned with just taking and getting that figure down. Now, okay, sitting, so you're really getting back from the drawing, stay away from it. Okay. Now, where you start the drawing, other than this, is not important. What you're after is the getting of the whole thing. Now, I find that actually, after having said that, I find my natural tendency is to take and start with the head. Now, what I want to do is we're only taking and concerned now with starting the drawing. We're not going to take and be preoccupied with trying to do any kind of finished drawing. So I'm primarily thinking in terms of line. Now, the first thing is I want to take and feel that attitude of the head. Again, the symbol, the basic symbol for a head is just a simple oval type form. And again, it's, as you do it, as you can see what I'm doing, this is sort of, we're just slapping it down. But as I'm taking and working at the model, I'm not doing that. I'm taking and I want to take and be careful. I'm actually drawing a little darker than I would normally draw so that you can see very clearly what I'm doing. I want to feel, I'm thinking of the top, the chin here, the top of the head, the axis that goes through the head, where this is going back in. Okay, volume, feeling for an ellipse to give me a sense of what the axis of the eyes are on, feeling where the ear is. Okay, now I'm down, feeling where the pit of the neck is. As I'm doing this, I'm continually taking and looking at the model, and I'm taking and going back to the first drawing I did. I'm trying to feel what this action is. And quite often it's just like I'm combining several different methods here now. I'm taking and seeing this, taking and actually try to draw. Remember, what you're trying to do is communicate with it. You're analyzing and you're communicating. So that this line now is taking in, I'm drawing through the center. It's not any line that I really see on the model. It's taking through the center. I'm trying to feel the movement that is going on in action. And actually taking, and now this is where I actually looking at the proportions. Like, for instance, the torso is roughly 4 heads high. I'm looking and I'm saying, okay, head's here, and I've got here. And this is going to be, basically down to the pubic arch, is basically 4 heads high. So I'm already taking my time and being careful about this. I'm looking, I hold my pencil up, analyze to see where that vertical line is, taking that vertical line and extending it, looking to the top of the head, carrying it all the way down to where the heel is. In other words, I could actually take and draw a line all the way down to where I'm going here. And it's a good idea to take and check your vertical alignments, check your horizontal alignments. Okay, now I've got this thing going. Okay, now the next thing here, I would take and look at the axis, the angle of the shoulders. Now it's very easy to be misled as you're doing this, and quite often you find instead of just taking in arbitrarily, just looking at thinking that the shoulder, oh yeah, it's square across, instead of just drawing a line, take and actually hold your pencil up to see what angle that shoulder is on. And though it looks fairly flat, straight across, it isn't. Her right shoulder is slightly raised, and of course it should be tipped off, the fact that she's got her hand on her hip, so that's pushing that shoulder up. So this is raised up slightly, so we get a slight angle that's taking and cutting across here. Now, next thing that should tip you off of what kind of action is going on is the fact that the weight is being carried on her left leg. And so that is taking and thrusting up on the hip. So we take and think of the axis across the pelvic area. Okay, this is where earlier I discussed the fact that the body is symmetrical, that we feel it's like a railroad track. We try to see one side or the other. These are the things that take and start to tell you what this action is. Look, see where things are going. Okay, now I start to take and work on this drawing. Now, what I'm doing here is sort of a procedural approach to drawing. I'm not going to carry this very far. I'm just going to take and go through the beginnings, and then I'll take and do a direct line drawing, and we'll take and do a more of a Daumier type drawing. But I just want to give you, regardless of what kind of drawing, is the thinking procedure that has to take and go. You have to go through. Now, thinking now here of the volume of this rib cage. Very simple mass. I'm trying to see. Now, again, as you notice, I'm putting lines down that don't really exist on the model. I'm taking and simplifying, taking in and drawing through from a conceptual point of view. Okay, feeling the pelvic area. Now these lines, like, again, would be normally done in a much, much lighter manner, so that they would basically disappear as I took and developed the drawing. And I'm also drawing at about a third or a quarter of the speed that I normally draw. Okay. Here, okay, so I've got my basic volume for the torso. Okay, think of breasts. Primarily, I'm just preoccupied with placement, where things are. Okay. Now, the leg, back leg, I draw transparently. Draw as if the front leg doesn't even exist. I'm more concerned about how this thing is going back in space, where the heel is back here, and to take and look, hold up my pencil and see a line from the heel going up, where that is taking and pulling, and it's taking and pulling right about through her right ear. So I'm just about on money here. Okay, think of the volume. And I start to block this thing in. I'm taking in drawing as if I was drawing a cylinder. I'm trying to think of the kind of lines that take and communicate the direction that that figure is taking and going in. That part of the leg is going in. Okay, so I'm thinking of a volume here, going back. I would draw a little lighter because it is going behind. I want to feel where this is at, pulling through, down. Okay. Next, the leg that's coming toward us, I'm concerned primarily to begin with here now how this takes and connects, how it takes and fits into the torso. I feel it's coming around, where the placement of the end of the knee is. Now, one of the things that is a sort of, I don't know if you call it a trick, but as a thing is that you planning in advance where you're going to take and put a line. Now, a lot of these things I do automatically. Like, that's something where you can see where I haven't got any lines on yet. Like if I'm drawing this arm, what I would do is I'm coming up here, I think, okay, the shoulder is up here. Now when I come, before I draw the line for the arm, what I would do is I come down, I've already gone through it, rehearsed it once, done a preliminary analysis with a chamois. Now I'll come down and I'll take and hit a point here and I say, okay, this is where the elbow is going to go. I may even put a dot down, something that you can see. But when I'm at this point, what I'll do is I'll take and just sort of, well, I'll take this line and think it through the center of the figure and extend that line. See if that line carries, what does it carry? Make sure that my angle is correct here. Make sure that the placement of this elbow is in proper relationship coming across horizontally. To take and look, see if the angle of this arm is taken coming through here. Now this may take just a second. In other words, I may just come down here and do this and stop for a second, look around, and just maybe even wave my hand. And I do a lot of this. You'll see where I'll take and do sort of preliminary stuff in the air. But it's all sort of rehearsing the thing, checking where these things are. So once I get the thing going, I say, okay, this comes down here. Then I just can very simply take and draw a very simple line to begin with. Now this stage of the drawing is usually referred to as the lay-in. This is just blocking it in. And I said this is a procedural type of drawing here. It's basically how we take and approach a drawing if we have a lot of time to take and develop a drawing. Okay. Here, and it's also, I feel, the most useful approach when you're taking a studying drawing, because you're taking the time to take and study relationships, how one thing relates to another. Where the elbow is on this side, you start to feel this coming across, coming down, through, think of length to width. And these lines, nothing is permanent. Anything can be changed. I can come across here, and if I decide that this is not in the right place and move the line over, I can come draw another line. And that's the trick, so that when you're starting, that you draw very, very lightly, gives you the opportunity to take and make these kind of adjustments and corrections. And besides, you notice I don't use an eraser. Now, not to say that we don't use erasers. So we take and use them, but as a drawing tool, not as a means of taking and correcting errors. Because the drawing, even if you have lines that don't necessarily look perfect, that's part of the drawing. A drawing is a drawing. It's not something. It's not a photograph. It's a process of thinking that takes and goes on. In fact, the drawing is what reveals more about the artist than the finished work does. The lines that you put down, what ends up on the paper is a direct relationship of what is in your head. And people always tell me that, well, students say that, gee, I understand what you're saying, but I just can't, haven't got it down on paper yet. Well, actually, you do not understand something until it gets on the paper. It has to be down there. You can intellectualize about it, but until all of the points come together, it is not really something that you own. Okay, this is the basic beginning. This is where the drawing starts. And this is the hardest part of the drawing. From here on in, it becomes frosting. Okay. Now, Jan, let's take let's try the seated pose, and I'll take and try a different approach. Let's take and turn this a little more profile. Don't fall off the stand there. Okay. Okay, that's good, just like that. Now, I'm going to take and do this one a little different in the beginning. I'm not working with the chamois. I'm going to take and deal with a more direct approach, dealing with more of a direct type of shape. But the same problems come up to play. I mean, nothing is really that much different. So if you take and which one of my basic procedures in teaching, when I teach at Disney or I teach at Brandeis or when I taught at Art Center, that the differences between artists are really not as important to learning as the similarities. And that I try to take and show how everybody taken really pretty basic was the same. Now, starting out, first consideration, I look at it, I've been looking at it as I'm talking here, I've been looking at the model, and you should do this, take a few moments before you start drawing, and I'm trying to say, what kind of a shape, what kind of configuration is this? You know, is she wider, with the arms to the elbow, or taller? You know, and how is it going to fit on this piece of paper? So, and I can make them very simply. I could take and do this. And if I was doing still life where something wasn't going to move, I probably would. And we even do this with the figure drawing. Take and just sort of think like this to this, what kind of a shape is taking place, and just sort of block in what area I'm going to occupy with the drawing. Okay. Now, instead of taking and doing a simple line drawing of the thing to begin with, of a stick figure, I'm going to take and go more for the shape. And again, I'm really starting with the head again. Okay. Now, but I'm not going to take and do the same thing. I'm going to go more for a direct shape. What's going on? Try to feel the shape, the hair. Now, they're two-dimensional. Okay. Now, the problem here is that this is still a procedural approach to drawing. I'm drawing a little darker than I would normally draw. I would be drawing this really light. Feel shape here. Now I want to take and look at the whole torso. First, before I even do the drawing here, in my mind, what I'm seeing, I'm trying to break this down. I'm looking at her and I'm seeing a shape that is coming down this way and coming down through here. I refer to this as sort of the basic beanism, where it's all like a bean bag. And actually, in class, I have a bean bag that I've taken and had one of the students made up for me, and where we can see this very, very, very simple shape to start with. Okay, you're trying to see what the basic action is. You're trying to analyze what the problem in the pose is. So the first thing I'm going to do now is to take and draw this mass, and I'm doing the same thing I did before. I'm taking and looking to see where this point is in relationship to the head, and if I need to, I'll hold my pencil up to take and see my verticals, see where that is coming down. Okay. Feel the shape, feel it come through, drawing transparently through, and feel that pelvis pulling underneath, fitting up in the mass. I shouldn't say mass too loudly here. It's rather delicate mass. At this stage, maybe I'm getting critical mass here. Okay. Feel, where breasts are, just placement, but I'm going for a bit more of the shape. Okay. The arm, let's come across. Okay, I'm just checking to see where I'm going, coming through. Notice I'm taking in, I can play with these margins that I started out with. Okay, here, I pause, I'm looking and now trying to think, okay, it's going out to here, same thing I did before. But now, instead of drawing too much of a plan, I try to go for a shape pretty close right away, establishing where I'm at. Okay, think of the width, where I'm going. Okay, this leg is going to be going back and attached in here, and she's seated on this chair. And in fact, we should take a little bit of time to start blocking in where this chair is at, where the legs of it are, okay, spatially. Okay. Now come back in, and again I'm going slow. This is slower than I would normally draw. Feel it's coming through, fitting in. I'm drawing actually the seam that I see on her leotards there. Down, end of the knee, think of where it's at. Down, draw shape. Down. Now this actually is not that far removed from the type of drawing that we take. We look at, say, the Michelangelos and the Pontormo, the Raphaels. It's basically, they would take and go for the shape. Cross, feel how the pecs take and pull out of here. The trapezius muscles come down across the back. Look at the scapula pulling out. Look at the volume, the end of the shoulder, setting back in. Think about how we can pull that arm out, where the end of the elbow is. First, I think about where I'm going. Come down, out, down, with length. Think, okay, here, to the wrist, going back. Okay, drop a little bit. Let's change my mind here a little bit. Okay, let's arm down, width, going for the shape. Now again, it's still a procedural approach to drawing, but I'm taking in beginning with primarily shape to begin with. Although I'm not getting too carried away with it, I'm just still as a terms of a lay-in. Okay, now I want to take and start one real quick one, another different approach. Let's take and do the reclining here. Now this is one of the things that is sort of the, I always have to laugh, is that, okay, we've obviously, and one of the things I've been talking about is taking and making a drawing fit the paper. Okay, again and again and again, you get a pose like this and somebody takes and starts trying to make it fit across here. It doesn't work. Turn the paper. Make it pull. Also, you notice where I'm taking and drawing the board is down here on my legs. Almost all the drawings I've been doing here, I've been having it sitting here. Okay. Now, this is going to be a little different. Here, it's almost like the chamois. Taking in, okay, feel where it's going. Now it's going to take and deal more of a flowing. Right. And again, these are drawing a little darker than I would normally draw, but it's a felt type of thing. I go back and I keep going for the total. Like combining the sort of stick figure, the shape, but it's a more flowing. I'm more concerned with how the figure flows, how it pulls, and around and over, back. Now, I actually, when I'm doing this, I actually feel like my pencil is over there on the model. I feel like I'm coming across her belly, taking and coming up over her rib cage and running up. In fact, I've had models, and it sort of gets sort of funny at times. When you're doing this, you get so intent, you must communicate some kind of thing over there, because I get models invariably move that part of the body that I'm drawing, as if I was tickling them or something. So, sort of, okay, flow, flow, feel the flow. I always take, and even when I'm taking and doing more of a design approach to the drawing, is I always think three-dimensionally. I'm always thinking of volume. Okay, so pulling over. And notice that I'm not being bashful about taking and putting lines down. I'm not afraid to take and make mistakes. And that is, again, one of the things that is the most difficult for the beginner, is to allow, sort of as the saying goes, allow everything to hang out. Just take and put those things down. Don't be bashful about letting the thing, deteriorate. And you do. If you see the tons of bad drawings that I've got, and although I would take and, as you're doing these drawings, not to take and throw anything away for many years, because when you're doing the drawing, what happens is that you tend to see the drawing in the light of what you were trying to accomplish. Now, I don't know of anybody who's drawing, and I've have friends and work with people who are real masters. Everybody always takes and says, well, it's okay, but this part here doesn't work, that part doesn't work. And if you take and start censoring your drawings, the minute that you've done them, they're always going to feel inferior to you. You've got to give yourself a little bit of time. After a while, you forget why you did the drawing. And you see the drawing for itself. And then you can take and look at it and say, well, gee, that's not bad. No, that looks pretty good. This part is sort of interesting. That's not too bad. And even if it's not that good, at least you can look at it and say, well, I've sure come a long way from that time. And or you can wonder why, what kind of problem you had that night when you did that. But, okay, now as you're drawing, notice I'm taking and I don't spend very much time on any one spot. I'm taking and continually going back over the drawing. Taking and trying to feel things. One of the things that I you tend to do these things so automatically you almost forget to take and talk about it. As I've been drawing here, these automatic sort of movements that I make going around the figure, I'm continually trying to see how one form fits into another. How we take and make this pull. I'm trying to feel how that pelvis is pulling out. I'm making this overlapping line take and come in front of the waist here. I'm trying to pull this form out. I'm trying to analyze how this is fitting. I try to feel the weight of the thigh dropping down. So it's as I've said before and again, is that what I'm doing is I'm analyzing the pose. I'm not copying the model. I'm trying to discover the model. So going back to what I've said earlier now, is that there's three things that you need to have. One, you have to have a method, a procedure, which I've been trying to give you a couple of procedures, and there's endless. Everybody develops their own form of logic, and drawing is logic. There's endless ways to approach it, but it has to be a rational approach. So you have to have a method. You have to know what it is you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it. Okay. Secondly, knowledge. Now, what I'm trying to give you here is a basic procedure that allows you to take and pursue the second point as you're taking and pursuing the first point. The procedure in the beginning is to take and get this total. Then the total helps you to take and develop the knowledge. And all of you have the spirit to take and pursue.